Pass.
Gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, it's almost April, and every April there's a little golf tournament played down in Augusta, Georgia called the Masters. And you probably are already seeing the advertisements for the Masters with a very famous quote by Jim Nance, "A tradition unlike any other." So we're talking about the constitutional amendment. I'm talking about Jim Nance and tradition. The reason I'm talking about tradition, ladies and gentlemen of the House, is that we have a tradition in this body that seems to occur every year. And that tradition usually involves a bill targeted to organized labor for a problem that doesn't exist. This is one of those bills. Before I get to the reason why we shouldn't vote for this because it's a problem that doesn't exist, I want you to remember a little bit about the history of organized labor in this country. The labor movement in this country transformed America, largely for the good. It was organized labor that built the ships and the aircraft that went overseas to help us win that war. They built the skyscrapers, and they even put the elevators in it, the boilers in the basement, the electricity in it, and the plumbing in those buildings. They helped build the railroads, the great interstate highway system, roads and bridges that we travel on and get our goods to market. They helped build the hot lanes in Northern Virginia, the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, Phase 1 to Dulles, on budget and on time. They changed America. They were the coal miners that mined the coal that fueled the industrial renaissance of America. And while they were doing that, they were also changing things in a social way. The 40-hour work week, thank you, organized labor. Old age pensions, relief for the destitute, prohibitions against child labor, safer workplaces, wages by which people could pay to buy a home, to buy a car, to put their kids through school. These are very tangible benefits that sometimes we forget about when we talk about these bills on the floor, but we shouldn't forget about them. Now, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, the captains of industry fought against a lot of these changes that we now take for granted. We should not lose track of that as we think about this bill. Now, we talked about this a couple weeks ago and talked about the fact that there is no threat to right to work in Virginia. None. No court cases, no legislation, nothing. Right to work has been on the books in Virginia for over 50 years. And there's never been a serious challenge to it. So what are we doing here? We are trying to score some really nice political points by putting something on the ballot. And in the process, we are proposing to change our Constitution, not something to be taken lightly. So, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I hope that you will vote today not to mess with our Constitution, not to put things in our Constitution that we already have in law that nobody's threatening. I hope that you will vote no on this constitutional amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Stanton, Mr. Bell.
Speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, in response to the gentleman, I would say this. If organized labor today was what organized labor was in 1930, then this would be different, and we wouldn't need this bill. But we all know that it's not. We watched decades of politicizing in organized labor. We've watched decades of corruption manifest itself, and we don't need that. And it's not our Constitution. if you're talking about just the people in this body. The Constitution belongs to all the people, just like the government does. And what this bill does is allow those people to decide whether they want this to be a permanent part of the Virginia Constitution, and that's where the decision should be made, and that's what this bill allows to happen. So I would encourage you to pass the bill.
The gentleman from Suffolk, Mr. Morris.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, right to work is not about right to work is about not being forced to join a union. Right to work does not disestablish any union. It simply says that it dissolves the servitude that you're bound to these unions to provide your hard-earned money to an organization you may not even believe in. The right to work is a freedom to work and to keep your hard-earned money as you see it and not be forced to join these organizations. Hope we pass this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 65, noes 34.